Hey, this is Matt Weiner, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. So, what's this project about? I'm actually going to be doing a historiographical piece, and I'm going to be looking at different events that occurred before the 1970s that I believe led to a change in American sentiment. Primarily, I'm going to be looking at what changed and why the Americans want to know about Japan. And what I'm looking at is why so many publications began coming out about Japan and the occupation during the 1970s. I was in the library doing some research and found an inordinate number of books and decided to change up my topic to try to figure out why these were coming out. I'm going to be looking at social, political, and economic events and factors that led this new interest in Japan. So what have I done? Going through different events that are important to our country's citizens as well as events that were significant to people internationally, I've actually been able to figure out, at least I think, why so many publications came out about Japan and the occupation in the 1970s. I've gone through forwards, prefaces, introductions, and epilogues in 23 different books. I've also conducted 2 phone interviews, and one of them was with someone who did major research for one of the books I looked at. So what major issues have been resolved? I had a lot of trouble trying to figure out how to put this all together. And some problem I'm running into now actually is figuring out what to keep in and what to cut. I seriously believe that by the time I'm finished writing, I could have a solid 20 pages. So I'm really going to need to, do a massive amount of tightening and cut down some things and try to figure out what's the most important pieces. So now I'm going to be looking at the issues and resolutions that arose during the formation of my paper. It's actually extremely hard to decide what is important to the paper and what is superfluous. After going through so many different authors' perspectives, I was trying to figure out how I could fit it all into the paper. I ultimately decided that it would be best to make this much more independent than I previously planned to. The way my paper works is that I actually am talking about the different events that led to the resurgence of publications about Japan, and I'm actually going to be comparing my views to the ones given by other authors. This is interesting because it's leading me to, it's mostly all my opinion based on what I've read, so it's a lot of my own opinion based, which is nice. And one of the hardest things about this project was the time. I don't think I've ever spent more time in the library going through books just for a single project. I mean, it was ridiculous. So what's my thesis? Well, my thesis is that there were many different social, political, economic issues, both domestically and internationally, that helped lead to this resurgence of Japanese publications in the 1970s. However, every time I do research, every time I read something, my views are changing, and my thesis is continually being reworked. So what are some of the social issues? The social issues I'm beginning into are the civil rights movement, student-led organizations such as the SDS, the Port Huron Statement, and the Vietnam War protests. Some of the political issues are, the McCarthy era's ending, the Kennedy era's beginning, the student-led stuff as well, and the Vietnam War. And economically, I'm looking at what was going on with the U.S., what was going on with Japan, Japan's economic miracle, and how Japan quickly became the second largest economy in the world. Social issues, regardless of where you live, have always been a driving force in changing the opinions of the public and the people running the government. So the civil rights movement, that was to me the watershed. That's the genesis of America trying to be forgiven for our past. And so the civil rights movement led to student-led societies such as the Students for Democratic Society, the SDS, and they actually came out with the Port Huron Statement. The Port Huron Statement was one of the most important documents to come out of the counterculture of the 1960s. It changed the way people looked at society, it changed the way our government should act, and the SDS, NAACP, those all led to Vietnam War protests, which also carried over into the political issues. When Kennedy came into office, just by looking at this picture, you can see that he was someone that gave a completely different face of government. People's interest in politics were completely renewed. Um, Not only were the SDS and other organizations very actively involved, other people had previously not taken an interest to our American government now were. Um, and after Kennedy was assassinated and when Nixon came into office during the Vietnam War, this was to me one of the most influential things that happened, which ultimately led to the rise of the publications. It was an event that was actually occurring in Asia, right by Japan, and it was done solely out of Cold War paranoia. Cold War paranoia was a driving force also in some of the actions that the U.S. took, you know, abroad. All these things really influenced, people's newfound interest in Asia once again. You can see that, all the people protesting, you saw that picture earlier, how the flowers were going into the guns. American citizens they felt terrible about it. They thought it was an atrocity. They wanted to be forgiven. They wanted to repent. And especially after the internment camps, during World War II, with being associated with people from Asia, America and Americans were really ripe to wanting to forgive. This was a time, unlike any other in our country, where the culture was changing as fast as the seasons. Which brings me to my next point, the economy. The economy has always been extremely important to America. As long as we can remember, America's been number one in the world. We have been the greatest economic superpower ever, and in 1945, Japan was decimated. Their inflation rates were ridiculously high. And around the time of the 1960s into the 70s, the U.S. economy was slowing down while Japan's economy was taking off. Their GNP per capita ratio increased 10% every single year. Ours from that span only increased 2%. However, inflation in our country was rising also. As you can see from the chart, you can just look at from 35 to 50 to 55 to 60, the total exports that Japan was putting out. Those are incredible numbers at incredibly fast changing times. So this brings me to my thesis and bringing everything back together. And how did this all happen? Why did these publications start coming out? I think it's because of all these reasons. My project consists of many hours in the library, phone interviews, forwards and introductions, background research, and it gave me an idea of, why these people were writing this or why these people wanted to. And so then in my paper, I'm going to be comparing my opinions to those of the authors and those that they give. So this is going to be turning into an even more of a historiographical work because it's a review of a review. And to be perfectly honest, I don't think one of these things that I talked about, social, economic, or political, was more important than the other. I think they were all equally important pieces that change the way we want to view history.